Are the Calgary Flames starting to take on some water as we move through the season? We discuss on today's crossover episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Flames.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's special crossover edition of Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for always as making both Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Just a reminder, you can find both shows absolutely free of charge on your favorite podcast platforms. On today's episode of Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild, we take a look at the home and home tilt coming up between the Wild and the Flames, with both teams trying to push towards a playoff spot. We'll talk trade deadline and much more coming up on today's episode. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, joined by one of the hosts of Locked on Flames, Jess Belmosto. Jess, welcome. And I find it ironic that we are two of the teams that are battling for a playoff spot, and it seems like it's only the Flames that are currently on the outside looking in. Everybody else is already thrown in the towel.
Yeah, I think the Flames are just one of those teams that like to make it more challenging for themselves than it needs to be. It's very much going that extra mile when you don't need to. It's kind of like when you're doing a group project and someone insists on doing like the most roundabout way when there's just like two quick answers here. So it's frustrating to watch this team night in and night out. Also, I apologize for sounding like this. I'm very sick, but I can't risk not talking about this wonderful bubble playoff position with you, Seth.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on. It is that time of year where it just seems like all the gunk just finds its way to everybody, and so I'll probably be next to get it. I hope not, but we'll see. I want to go back, Jess, to the big trade before the season. Obviously, it's interesting too that such a big trade has led to both the Panthers and the Flames kind of taking a step back this year. So is it as simple as just the parts not gelling as much as they did last year? Or what kind of led to, from the Flames perspective, not having as much success this year as you guys did last year?
I think a lot of it does have to do with the two high-end departures in Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau. They really had the finishing touches there that just are completely missing now with them being gone. I think that Dylan Dubé and Andrew Mangiapane have both stepped up in that aspect, but I don't really think that they're not Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau. It's as simple as that, and a lot of it does have to do with the vibes in the locker room due to Mr. Darryl Sutter, supposedly, according to Alan Walsh, allegedly, and some inside sources in Calgary.
Bad vibes are not what you want for a team, especially this far into the season. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. I did want to ask you as well, Jacob Markstrom has had an up and down year, to say the least. I think I looked at the stats, and in 2023 alone, he's had 8+ starts. I can't recall what he did in his last start, but I know it was 8 starts of 3+ goals allowed. Defensive breakdowns in front, or what's up with Markstrom here as 2023 rolls on?
I think a lot of it does have to do with both truly the goaltending mechanics and just the defensive breakdown. Nikita Zadorov has really struggled this season without Erik Goodbranson on his pairing, and the absence of Oliver Shillington has just absolutely just decimated the strength of that 6 defenseman spot. And it's hard for me to sit here and be like, oh, Jacob Markstrom couldn't stop a beach ball, when at the same time he's gone out there and done old Jacob Markstrom stuff like it's nothing. Like last night, he ended up coming in the Bruins game, or game against the Bruins rather, on Tuesday night. And he came in after Vladar allowed 2 goals, and he allowed, one more in regulation and then another in overtime, but he looked fantastic. He looked good. I thought that, he didn't have to face too many shots, but at the same time, the shots he was facing were pretty decent, high caliber shots. And he also him and his partner just welcomed a baby like 48 hours before that. So like there's been a lot of things kind of factoring into Markstrom's performance, and I think that's kind of why Brad Treliving needs to go out and get another defenseman at this deadline.
I want to ask, because I know this is something you have talked about, and I was very interested in this angle. You talked about Darryl Sutter and just kind of the bad vibes around the team so far this year. And you had thought that maybe he is trying to maybe go that step higher from coach to GM, like we just saw happen with Barry Trotz.
Yes.
Do you think there's some legs to that theory? Would Sutter be somebody that's looking to try to take that higher step up into the front office?
Yes. I truly believe at this point in his career, he wants to, before we pulled him off the farm, he was doing some assistant work with the Ducks, and he had worked in the Flames front office as a general manager years ago, I think in the early 2010s. That doesn't feel that long ago, but when you think of how much turnover there has been, it definitely is a long time ago. But he ended up quitting ahead of being fired. And he has a very close relationship with the owner of the team. And apparently there were some moves in free agency that he wanted to make that Brad Treliving was like, no, that doesn't make sense for this team. That's not, what we're trying to assemble. And that's kind of the reason why we haven't seen a lot of the younger Flames players make the jump, because it's just not Darryl Sutter's way. And it's been painful. I think that Brad Treliving has been one of the better GMs, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years, especially, getting that return for Tkachuk rather, and still being able to compete, not at that high end level, but to not blow it all up and be like, okay, here are 6 forwards that you have never heard of, and they're all making their NHL debut tonight on opening night. But I do think Darryl Sutter is interested in making that jump, to answer your question, especially with it being Brad Treliving's last few months without a contract.
Interesting. Boy, that would be something. And it would be, I think, see, I don't know where to rank it with Barry Trotz, because that just came out of nowhere.
Completely out of left field.
I had no idea that he had an inkling to join the front office, and yet here we are. So would it be crazy to see Sutter do that? No. It still just is weird to see, hey, he coached for a long time, and now he's going to do this other thing at the late stage of his career. I don't know. It's weird.
I mean, it's one less locker room for him to be barricaded out of. So for his sake, I hope that everyone keeps the trash barrels locked away in the front office or wherever their workspace is.
Protect them at all costs.
Yes.
Well, we will flip, and I'll give you an opportunity to ask some Wild-related questions, because you talk about a team that is just making things a little too difficult. big vibes for the Minnesota Wild so far this season. And so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about trade deadline strategy for both teams, as well as some keys for both teams in the two games coming up. All that on the way as we continue today's crossover episode of Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild. Today's episode is brought to you by the exclusive sports betting partner of Locked On. That, of course, is FanDuel. And we are well past the midway point of the NHL season. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download FanDuel Sportsbook today. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to who gets the goals to who takes the shots. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Locked On. Continuing today's crossover edition of Locked On Flames and Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making both episodes your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we've got a live trade deadline show coming for you on Friday from 2 to 4 Eastern to recap all of the biggest moves that happen all throughout the NHL with all of our favorite Locked On NHL hosts giving their takes on all the big moves. Make sure to check that out at the Locked On NHL YouTube channel, which is available and free everywhere. All right, Jess, I'll turn the floor over to you. Any Wild-related questions you have? I am, as they say, an open book.
Yes. So I think to start, what is the identity of the Minnesota Wild? Because as an outsider, I feel like they don't have one.
You've got it pretty spot on.
Okay.
It is a team that just was the vibe capital of the world last year. They
Yes.
scored a ton of goals, had just a crazy amount of comeback wins. I think the overall theme last year was no deficit is too big.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, no Kevin Fiala, which was a huge chunk of the goals this year, gone. Not only that, but probably one of the better players not named Kirill Kaprizov at just getting into the zone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a team that has struggled to score. They have struggled to score. The wins have not been nearly as exciting. There have been a lot of tense moments in pretty much all of the games so far this season. But it is a resilient team, I think, is kind of the phrase this year. It's a team that, despite the odds, despite going up against some really good teams in both conferences, it seems like they just do what they need to do to win. They've got some great goaltending. Filip Gustavsson's been ridiculous all season. They have gotten some timely clutch goals on special teams. And so it's a team that isn't blowing everybody out like they were last year, but they just are finding a way to overcome. And there have been some games, like they played the Los Angeles Kings last week, and I think the shots were something like 40 to 20, something, just some crazy disparity. And the Kings just dominated possession time the whole game. And yet the Wild won 2-1. And so they have, I think, gotten accustomed to things being difficult for large parts of the season. But I think with the success that they had last year, it seems like a group that, hey, we're going to have to hunker down, and we're really going to have to fight for this. And I mean, one of only two teams in the Western Conference right now on a winning streak, or in the Central Division, one of the only two teams in the Central Division right now on a winning streak. They're 7-1-2 in their last 10 games. They just keep
That's
finding a way.
Yeah, no, that's incredible for them to string that many wins together. Please let the Flames know how to do it. They haven't won 2 in a row since December and 3 in a row since I think November. So it's been a little bit. What do you think keeps them going? Like, is there someone in the room that is just more outspoken than others? Is it the coach? Is it just kind of everyone just kind of vibing off of each other? Or what's the vibe?
I think it is really two players that kind of stir the drink for this year's team. I mentioned Filip Gustavsson, who just continues to do things that are just insane. In the win against the Islanders, he had a save in which he was able to kick the puck from going into the net with the blade of his skate. Like,
Wow.
full extension kick, and he got just the tip of the puck enough to keep it from going into the net. And so I think this team gets a ton of confidence every time he goes between the pipes, which is becoming more and more frequent, because you're going to get a good performance from him, and he takes a ton of pressure off of the offense to where, hey, we get 2, we're probably going to win this game. And not only him, but this offense just follows so much of what Kirill Kaprizov does night in and night out. He's been really the only consistent scorer on this team. Just continues to reset every record this franchise has ever had. And so I think a lot of it is, as those two go, this team goes. And you see them do their thing. And pretty much every night it's like, okay, we need 1 or 2 guys to do this or to score a goal once to just help them out a little bit, because those have been the 2 guys that have largely been carrying this team so far this year. And they just continue to do it every night.
Yeah, that's awesome that you have goaltending to the point where it kind of takes the weight off of everyone else. I don't know what that is like. We kind of forgot what that's like over here in Calgary Flames land, but I think it's just absolutely phenomenal that this team, that the Wild, are just they're the vibe. Like, I feel like there's no real identity, and that isn't always a bad thing, but they just kind of reform themselves every year depending on what the season calls for. And you know, are the Wild a team that do they see a lot of roster turnover year after year?
It's funny because obviously the big ones they had this offseason
Yes.
were super noticeable. Cam Talbot, Kevin Fiala, those were the 2 big ones. But they have had a handful of guys on the back end. Like this past season, they traded Dmitry Kulikov. They lost Nick Delorier. They traded Tyson Jost during the season. Well, they put Tyson Jost on waivers during the season, and he was claimed by Buffalo. So they do have a fair amount of back end roster turnover, because I think that's one of the areas where Bill Guerin has excelled, is being able to find those guys that he can bring in. And it's especially important with where the Wild are at with the Parisi and Suter contracts and the buyouts, and trying to navigate through that. He has done a really good job of finding guys that don't cost a ton that can come in and still be effective. I mean, Freddie Gaudreau, who was brought in a couple of years ago by Guerin, leading the NHL in shootout goals this year.
That's incredible.
Is just, you look at that stat and you're like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And trading Cam Talbot for Filip Gustavsson, who was kind of an unknown coming into this season. Look how that worked out. So he has shown the ability to really cultivate the back end of this roster. Now, where they're at currently, with a log jam of like middle 6 to bottom 6 guys, but that's what your prospects are for, is to come up and see, okay, this guy fits in this spot in the lineup. This guy fits in this spot in the lineup. And so there are going to be opportunities here over the next couple of years to really see what these young guys have. But in addition to that, he's made some really good trades, some good signings to help complement that throughout the lineup.
Yeah, and I saw something yesterday that said that he's not sure if he's done cooking. He doesn't know. So I guess we'll find out. I feel like everybody's preheating their oven in the Western Conference
Oh, yeah.
while the Eastern Conference is like, okay, the cake's done. We've iced it. Like, you guys are so far behind. But, I feel like if there's a team that's going to pull out something that we aren't expecting, it is absolutely the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, I like that notion, and I'll give you a Hell's Kitchen parable for where the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference are at.
Yes.
Eastern Conference is the red team, and they've got like all their dishes done.
Oh, yeah.
And they're plating. They're getting ready to present their super teams that they've constructed. And the blue team is the Western Conference. And one of the chefs that's responsible for the main entrees can't cook a fish, like can't cook the fish properly. And so you just have the red team doing their thing. Other parts of the blue team are getting angry. Gordon Ramsay's yelling at the top of his lungs from the top of the kitchen, like, where's my salmon? Like,
Yeah.
There's such a disparity between the two. Boston's a wagon.
Yeah.
The Rangers are a wagon. The Hurricanes, on and on.
Yeah.
And in the West, you're like, who's
It's
going to
wide
get there
open.
from there?
Yeah. It's wide open in the West this year. Even the Avalanche have fallen off, so you can't even just say, like, it's this one. We don't know. Could it be Seattle? Maybe.
Yeah,
Not
and it's
Arizona. I feel like it's the only certainty there.
yeah, Arizona and Chicago are the only two that really are definitely not
Yeah.
definitely not in the playoff picture. But there are plenty of others. I mean, look at the Dallas Stars. They've got like 13 overtime losses already this season.
Sounds like the Flames.
It's weird how many times they can get a game to overtime and then they just can't close it out.
Absolutely. And that's very similar to the Flames, but I said last year after the Flames knocked out the Stars, the Stars rather were going to see a little bit of regression. It hasn't been horribly noticeable like the Flames have, but I think the Stars could definitely pull something out here, depending on how far they want to go and if everyone stays healthy, because they do have some guys that are definitely up there in age. But Seth, I think we're gonna wrap it up with some trade deadline talk and we're ready to plate our entrees.
Oh, yeah.
We're ready to call it in. But before we do that and talk about the keys to these games, I want to talk to you about Indeed. If you're hiring and you need to post a job, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. So it's fairly easy. Indeed partners with you on every step. And every step of the hiring process, you find great talent through time-saving tools, Indeed instant match assessments, and virtual interviews. I will say, those assessments, they set you apart. So if you are looking to start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked on. Offer is valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/locked on to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Oh my God.
Continuing our crossover, last segment of today's crossover episode of Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild. Once again, thanks for making both shows your first listen. Make sure you follow and subscribe to both shows on YouTube. Follow us on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms. That list, it seems like, is growing every day.
Seriously.
So make sure that you follow along so you don't miss out on any news from your favorite teams through the trade deadline and the rest of the way as well. So let's talk trade deadline, the approach. I know you had mentioned that you had a particular position in mind that the Flames should try to address before the deadline on Friday.
Yeah, I think any team that is going to go out and make a playoff run is going to be adding an extra defenseman right now because, as the season rolls on and playoffs roll on, your defensemen are dinged up. But in order for the Flames to make the playoffs and start sniffing the playoffs, they need to strengthen their back end just a little bit more. With Luke Shen off the market, I don't know what they're going to do now. Maybe they take Mike Riley from Boston, who has spent most of the season in the AHL. So it's really one of those things that the Flames just need an extra body because their AHLers, their prospects, those poor kids are not surviving in Darryl Sutter's system.
Yeah, it's tough too because you're trying to prevent an injury that hasn't happened yet, but it seems like they always do at this point in the season, like right after the deadline happens. Oh no, we lost a second line wing. What are we going to do? So it's just trying to find something. And if not for the fact that the Flames are in essentially direct competition with the Minnesota Wild, although the way things have gone over the last week, it's now more like the Winnipeg Jets who are fighting for one of those wild card spots. I would say we could give you a slightly used Matt Dumba.
I think my phone just went on airplane mode. Oh no, what happened? We disconnected.
I have heard an interesting note. There was an interesting nugget today for Wild fans that could lead to a hint as to what's going to happen for the rest of the deadline. Michael Russo, who is just elite.
Fantastic.
In one of his weekly radio hits, he mentioned that current Gopher defenseman Brock Faber, it is expected that the Wild are going to burn a year of his contract to get him to the NHL this season. We had speculated as to if that was going to be the case, but now this is as concrete of a source as you can get. Yeah. So with Brock Faber, you're obviously not going to have him sit on the bench.
No.
But in order to make that happen, the Wild currently have 7 playable defensemen. Somebody might be on the move before Friday.
We'll have to see. And, I'm sure this is something Tree Living and Sutter, because it's just, we don't know who's calling the shots really, are looking into. I love this time of year when the college kids are wrapping up their seasons, and it's time for these kids who are just so hopeful to make these big, giant adult decisions. And all the adults in their lives are probably like very like, hey, like you need to think about this logically. And they're like, no, put me in the NHL.
Yeah, get me there immediately.
Yeah. And it's exciting. And the Flames have a prospect at Harvard, Matthew Coronado, who would absolutely make a difference in their top 6, or even really the middle 6, because it's so deep in just the forward depth there. But who do you think is going to be moving? Do you really think it's going to be Matt Dumba?
So here's the thing with that. It seems like, unless this was Bill Guerin just trying to drum up some last minute interest, his comments regarding Matt Dumba have made it seem like he's going to be hanging around. So I kind of wonder if one of the other defensemen, in this case, Alex Goligoski, maybe is on the move, because Goligoski he's up there in age. Now he's played sporadically for the Wild. And if you are trying to open up a spot for Brock Faber, somebody is going to be coming out of that grouping. You're not going to send Kalen Addison down. He's he's like in the top 5 in rookies in points so far this season. So it's going to have to probably be one of those two guys that ends up being moved, and Goligoski could be a 7th defenseman for somebody.
Yeah.
I mean,
if he's over 6 feet tall, I'm sure
Toronto has 9 defensemen right now. Like,
that's absurd.
Somebody out there needs a 7th defenseman, and whether it's for a low-level prospect or a pick, just make it happen.
Yeah. That's very possible. You know, I wouldn't count anything out. Like I said, the Flames are still deciding on what entree they want to cook and if they even want to cook. So it'll definitely be interesting come Friday. I mean, it's already Thursday. So
I know
it's time. Like it's time to start faxing in the requests. So there's not that 32 log jam backup that we had last year or the year before, and make sure general managers, I know you're listening to this podcast right now, make sure that you are checking their no trade team lists and everything like that, because we don't want that happening again.
Get that updated. Yeah, get that updated so you don't have that happening at the last minute. And the thing I always worry about with episodes like right before the trade deadline is something happening before you post it. So just to be safe, can you believe blank traded for blank?
Oh my goodness. That was such an overpayment or underpayment. We don't know yet.
We're just covering our bases.
Yeah, seriously.
Just to make sure. It is going to be a crazy deadline. I feel like that Tanner Jeannot trade changed the whole thing.
100%. I feel like that ripped the Band-Aid right off, and everyone was just kind of like, all right, this is the market.
It's like, well, geez, if they're going to give up that for him, we're going to have to get a little more creative to find somebody to fill the spot that we're looking to fill.
Yeah, seriously. It's definitely a seller's market, so let's
buckle
see.
Up.
Yeah, seriously, buckle up. I'm interested to see how many things are going to break at like 1:00 this morning when you're listening to this, because I remember that's when the Taylor Hall to Boston trade broke. It was Wednesday into Thursday, and everyone was like, oh, I thought we were sleeping, but okay.
And that last 10 minutes of the deadline ends up being extended like 40 minutes after the deadline, because they just get backlogged with trades that they're trying to fit in at the last second.
Yep.
So just clear your schedules from like 2 p.m. Central, from 1 p.m. Central time to like 4 p.m. Central time.
Yeah. Get your snacks, hang out with the Locked On NHL live show. You get to hear from the local experts, and it's always a fun time, always, because you know someone is going to just absolutely fleece another team.
Yes, there will be a couple of those.
Yes.
Just to wrap up, we're gonna do something just quick, talking about our 2 games. And this is a fun thing that I literally just thought of. So we're gonna take these categories: offense, defense / goaltending, and special teams.
Oh.
In order of which one you think needs to be the best, like on their game the best against the Wild. How would you rank them for the Flames?
I would say defense needs to be first, just because, you know, obviously Minnesota is a very offensive-minded team, and the defense has made some costly mistakes these last few games, and it's time to just kind of get it together. You're all old enough to be playing in the NHL, so you should be acting like you can play in the NHL. Goaltending, offense, and then special teams. I'm not horribly concerned about special teams.
my rankings are completely different, but here's why. So number one for me is special teams, because that's what led to the Wild losing against Calgary the last time these two teams matched up. They
Mhm.
took like 5 penalties. I'm just sitting at my TV going like this, like, stop committing penalties. So special teams is first. I am going to put goaltending second, because even though they're having down seasons, handful of those guys for the Flames worry me considerably
Yes.
about the, like, all it takes is playing the Minnesota Wild for them to get back on track. And
Yes.
then offense, I'm putting third, because until we see it, it continues to be the Kirill Kaprizov show. And so I'm not super worried about him, although a lot of attention devoted to him tends to be a problem. So we'll see. But I would say special teams is absolutely like critical for the Wilds. Their penalty
Yeah.
kill has been pretty good. They're like 26 for their last 26. Knock,
That's
knock,
impressive.
knock, so I don't jinx it. But yeah, it should be fun. It is interesting. I don't know that I can't recall the last time the Wild had, outside of the COVID year, games against the same opponent back to back, multiple days apart.
That's happened to Calgary a lot this year. It happened against San Jose, St. Louis, and the Wild. I don't know what's going on.
Weird scheduling.
Yeah, whatever. It's fine. At least like the key dates, like free agency, is back to where it should be, I guess.
Yeah.
Like that's how I can book my vacations.
All we need to do, like, we're close to back on track for a normal year. And so just keep that going. But all I'm saying is, it's okay if you don't play the same team like
Yeah.
back to back. You can spread them a couple of weeks apart.
It's not the end of the world if you
Yeah.
have to squish another game in there, or just not make them play each other twice within 3 days. Like it's okay.
Just a thought, schedule makers.
Yes, because again, I know that everyone important listens to these shows.
Oh, of course.
Absolutely.
And I think we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Obviously, should be a fun 2 games between these two teams. And you can hear more about both the Flames and the Wild by listening to both of our shows, Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on anything leading up to the trade deadline and the rest of the season after that. You can find new episodes for both Locked on Flames and Locked on Wild every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.